This program is produced by the following organizations and businesses: Healthy Stages, the Powerbox Kids Club, the Grandparent Hall of Fame, the Sierra Association of Foster Families, and KWNK Studios.
Now Moses stood on the Red Sea shore. Oh, oh, what a river to my boy. Pharaoh's army got drowned. Oh, Mary, don't you weep. Yeah. Oh, Mary, don't you weep no more. Oh, Mary, don't you weep no more.
She saw that train coming. She said, "Boy, you stand here." And when that train came, she threw herself in front of that train and she shot up in the air like she was a bird filled with buckshot right in front of that boy.
What you just heard is an excerpt from a 2015 musical theater production titled The Boy in the Gas Chamber. Floyd Clyde Loveless, 15 years old, mentally and physically disabled, was left with no resort but crime when facing starvation. This hungry boy served the death penalty in an American gas chamber in 1944. I'm Pierce Horvath, recording from DePaul University in Chicago, and welcome to today's podcast, Hunger Pains. I have on the phone a man who calls himself a humanitarian artist. He's the playwright and the performer of numerous theatrical, television, and radio programs regarding food insecurities amongst diverse populations.
Pierce, I want to say thank you for beginning the podcast with the excerpt from the play I wrote, The Boy in the Gas Chamber. I'd like to introduce myself to our audience. I'm Joseph Galata, and I am here in the studio in Reno, Nevada. Crime is so related and connected to the lack of food or the eating of junk food, which we call food insecurities. You've done your research and I've done my research. So, Pierce, right now, 820 million people in the world, children most especially, are afflicted by food insecurities. So when I found the story of Floyd, which is a true story, this is a story about a child who was raised in poverty, traumatized by his mother's lack of inability to feed him, then her suicide, throwing herself in front of a train in his presence at the age of 3 because of despondency and that she couldn't feed him. He started at the age of 5, 6, 7 in a little tiny village of stealing, breaking into people's homes. And then it led to more crime, to breaking into stores. The kid needed to eat. And we wanted to present something, a musical theater production based on food insecurity leading to children committing acts of crime. So I thank you for sharing that.
Rhonda LaFontaine is an acclaimed international opera singer who has performed in Egypt, China, Cuba, South Africa, Korea, and other countries. Besides singing, she works with adults with disabilities. Combining the two, she certainly has knowledge of food insecurities and the power of music.
I think music and singing, no matter what you're singing, popular music, opera, musical theater, country music, is the most amazing way to have people feel in their hearts what it's like to be another human being. So if we're thinking about people who have food insecurity, being able to depict that and present it in a story that is beautifully done through drama and singing is the best way to touch the hearts and minds of people and give them an experience which leads to empathy for that situation. I work with people who have disabilities through the vocational rehab program in the state where I live. And so I'm dealing with many people with disabilities, and many of these people were foster children when they were younger. I also tutor foster children. And a couple of things I'd like to relate. Just today I was working with one young man who is 17, and he lives in a home where everything is locked up, including the food. And so he doesn't know how to relate to food really in a healthy manner, or how to share food. He was sharing a story with me today about having eaten a piece of food in a person's home. The man was asleep and he was staying there, and he felt like he had stolen it because he took it out of a bowl that was in the kitchen. When you live with extreme disconnection from the nurturing aspect of food and community and sharing that often comes centered around food, you don't have a clear sense of how to relate to the food at all. He's definitely had food insecurity because he hasn't had freedom to eat the food when he's hungry. It's more regimented. I worked with another woman. This woman was in her 30s, but she'd grown up in foster care. And when she got her food stamps at the beginning of the month, she went out and bought tons of food. But that food was gone within the first few days. And I would ask her, why are you eating, like slices of bread and things like that, just a bare minimum of food toward the end of the month? And she said that she just had a compulsion that when she got the food, she had to eat all of it immediately. So she would compulsively eat, and eat all of that food within a few days, and then she literally had very little food the last 3 weeks of the month.
Thank you, Rhonda. Joseph, of all the shows you've written that include the subject of food insecurity, would you say Starlight, Starbright was the most challenging?
The hardest show I've ever had to write in relation to food insecurities. And again, a theatrical musical based on a true story. In certain Middle Eastern countries like Afghanistan, there's a centuries-old tradition called bachibazi, where rich men go into poor mountain villages and they buy beautiful little boys from their parents. And they train them to dance as girls for men at men's parties, celebrations. And then they, as they grow older, they participate not only as dancers for the men, but as sexual slaves for the men. And usually around the age of 15, when puberty is really reaching its peak and acne and they're not as beautiful anymore, they're thrown out onto the streets and they're left there to starve, or they're left there to turn to crime. And it's all about survival. And that is what so much of food insecurities deals with. It is about driving us to unethical, immoral acts in order to survive. So this is an excerpt from a show that I wrote and performed all over. It's called Starlight, Starbright, where I play a man who has been a bachibazi boy and has struggled to survive, forgive, and most of all, to eat.
I ran out of the village, but when I got to the line of demarcation, I wasn't going to let me go without revenge. I stood on a boulder and I shouted as loud as I could, pointing to my father. I thought, if you're going to humiliate me and hate me, I'm going to humiliate you even more. And I screamed in front of everybody as loud as I could, Takmat! Gelak! Bakhom! Meslak! Sak Bismillah!
Let's not forget the thousands of kids and adults, but especially the kids, who in other countries are eating out of garbage dumps. Literally finding food in garbage dumps.
If it's not love, where is it heading? If it isn't love, will it...
Ann Morrison has appeared on Broadway in quite a few Hal Prince musicals in both New York City and London. She's also the artistic director of a major theatrical program using theater with kids and adults with disabilities, as well as the founder of a solo theater festival where many of the annual shows focus on health.
Now, one year, one of our elders asked his teen, "Is there anything that you want to tell me that I didn't ask?" And she said, "Well, I lived with my drug addict parents. I'm not with them anymore, but we just weren't being cared for. We just were starving. We weren't getting enough to eat. We were living on instant oatmeal, and I discovered that I could just dig through trash bins for food. We were too embarrassed to tell anybody anything. Now, our youth in our community has been aware of levels of poverty. Obviously, it's in our community. But real starvation was something that wasn't really, something that's in some other country, somewhere else. The fun thing that I loved is that teen said, after hearing my story told by another person, I realized that I don't have to tell that story that way anymore. It's just not who I am now.
Thank you, Anne. Joseph, we're recording this podcast during the holiday season of American Thanksgiving and International Christmas. Obviously, food is a major part of the celebrations in each home. You wrote a musical show about impoverished chimney sweepers during the Dickens era and how food security was a major affliction at Christmas time for them.
One of the shows that we did because of this was called A Chimney Sweeper's Christmas Musical. It was a show that I wrote and performed with 5 teenagers and 5 adult performers. We played chimney sweepers in the home of Charles Dickens while he was writing A Christmas Carol. And it was an interactive show. The kids in the audience didn't know that they would be called up to the audience to sing with us and dance with us. I'm going to send you an excerpt, and I'd be honored if you played it because it deals with history. The history of food insecurity amongst the impoverished children. And thank goodness for Mr. Dickens, because he brought this to our attention. Just look at his stories of David Copperfield and Oliver Twist. But I'm sending you an excerpt from the show, A Chimney Sweeper's Christmas Musical.
Oh, what do you fix your eyes upon me so, young man? Is it love? Good gracious, I think it is love. Look, it's blushing. And why wouldn't you love me? Everyone I know loves me. They do. Well, bless your heart and soul, as Mr. Dickens is fond of saying. You know, every time Mr. Dickens is walking down the street and he sees a poor beggar pleading for a coin, or a little mother, starving child, or a poor orphan crying in the street, he always tosses him a coin and says, bless your heart and soul, he does. For me, if I see somebody poor on the street, I'm more likely to just say, go on, you'll be as happy as you'll ever be. Because I ain't got no pity for them. Myself either, poor as I am.
And you're poor.
I'm real poor.
That production is titled A Chimney Sweeper's Christmas.
The list of kids who are practically magical is practically endless. One of the most magical youngsters I have ever met is a 14-year-old Barry who loves to solve problems.
I had the bounty of writing and producing and hiring 8 actors to do a children's radio drama, a whimsical show called Food Treasures. And the story plot line was very simple. It was about a wild berries garden where all these berries grow. And the Society of Rottenness wanted to take over the land, destroy the berries garden, and build a new chocolate factory. And the show is about children and the grandparents going out to save the wild berries gardens. And the purpose of it was to encourage children and their parents and grandparents to go shopping during the holiday season and buying fruits and not so much candy. So I'd like to share with you our excerpt from the recording of Food Treasures.
For instance,
it has been my absolute delight to be your tour guide through the wild berry gardens this afternoon. I do hope you youngsters have learned a lot about the delicious, colorful, juicy, healthy, sweet, and sour berries that grow around the world. Now, before all of you children go home, I'm wondering if anyone here can remember how many different types of berries you learned about today.
Well, that's easy for me because my name is Barry, B-A-R-R-Y, and I remember all the berries, B-E-R-R-I-E-S, growing in the wild berry garden. We've got blueberries, blackberries, raspberries, gooseberries, acai berries, bearberries, boysenberries, buffalo berries, cranberries, cowberries, goji berries, huckleberries, loganberries, nancy berries, salmon berries, and strawberries.
Good gosh, what a memory you have, young man. All right, everyone, it has been a joy to meet you. Bye!
Now I understand that was a popular radio drama that was streamed across the world. with over 600,000 hits. Whimsical, entertaining. Perhaps each of us learn more from being entertained rather than preached or lectured to. Another theatrical production Joseph created is Papa, Come Dance With Me Again, which is about a popular children's television show host diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and his wife, the caregiver, who is terrified that she doesn't have enough money to feed him.
Pierce, before you play an excerpt from Papa Come Dance With Me Again, let me also share that this was also about grandchildren in relation to their grandparents who have Alzheimer's. Because, for instance, when it's a child's birthday party and everybody's having pizza and hot dogs or whatever, and then birthday cake and ice cream, a child at his or her own birthday party doesn't understand why grandma or grandpa with dementia isn't eating or doesn't remember that he or she just ate something. So Papa Come Dance With Me Again deals with food insecurities as seen through the eyes of the caregiver, the child involved in the family, and, of course, the television children's host, the dancing jubilant hobo, who now in real life is diagnosed with Alzheimer's.
Maybe his blood sugar's too low. Maybe during the commercial, one of the technicians in the studio will give him a glass of orange juice. He didn't eat a decent breakfast this morning. He's never acted like this on his TV show.
Oh, no, boys and girls. Oh, the director in the control booth is telling me that I already told you the story. Oh, she says it's magic memory mirror time, and I forgot all about the magic memory mirror.
35 years of shows, and he's never messed up. I don't know where I'm going to get the money next month to buy all the food he needs. We need. The medical bills are eating us up. I'm not feeding him enough food because the medicine he needs for this no-good-for-nothing dementia of his. I don't know what to do. His Social Security isn't enough. My husband has dementia, and I can't take care of him properly. I can't afford to feed my own sick husband. He shouldn't be doing that children's TV show anymore. His brain is just too foggy from the Alzheimer's and from being hungry all the time. I keep asking myself, what's more important? Medicine for his brain or food for his stomach?
I'd like to ask Ryan Hayes, a documentary filmmaker in Chicago, to share with us his personal experience of food insecurities amongst children and the elderly.
Right now I'm working on food insecurities, and there's two avenues that I really like to focus on is for the elderly. So one of the first things that happens when somebody is diagnosed with Alzheimer's is that their license is taken away. Now I'm wondering, how are these people supposed to go to the store to get food? And even if they get food, how are they supposed to prepare themselves a meal? It's not like they're going to remember to cook. They're going to forget to leave the stove on. I'm just wondering if there's services for this. And there is, but I know in Illinois there's a thing called like Meals for Wheels, and that is losing funding. And then on top of it, for people who have Alzheimer's, not everyone is able to get into an elderly housing unit. And if they are, most people can't afford it or receive government aid. I know my mother and many of my coworkers have spent hours, maybe even acting as a second job, basically because it's so hard for people who have paid into Social Security their whole lives to get reimbursement so they can get taken care of. And I just think when it comes to food insecurity for Alzheimer's, that we really don't take care of our elderly, and it's hard for them to take care of themselves. There's this article from Division of Nutritional Sciences at Cornell called Nutritional and Health Consequences Are Associated with Food Insecurity Amongst U.S. Elderly Persons. And it says that food insecure elderly persons have significantly lower intakes of energy, protein, carbohydrates, saturated fat, niacin, riboflavin, vitamins B6 and B12, magnesium, iron, and zinc.
Ryan, are you working on any programs that deal with food insecurities?
The strange thing about food insecurities is that not only is it total lack of access to food, but also it's someone can't afford a certain amount of food, so they have to buy cheap, unhealthy food, adding to the obesity crisis to it all. Imagine being a grandparent who is not working right now, doesn't have a job, and they're only able to pick up a couple chips. They're only able to pick up some unhealthy snacks. They're not able to cook the full out food that needs the nutrition, leading to the child's obesity. And right now I'm currently writing the script for an animated video about how food insecurities affect the millions of grandparents who are raising their grandchildren. And it's a nice little story about how the grandparent is getting too sick and they're not able to leave their chair. So a child tries to create grandma's secret potato recipe and they accidentally leave the stove on for too long. But then they have the steam fairy godmother come in and actually do a time warp to where the steam fairy godmother actually teaches a child how to use technology such as a stove, how to read so they're better able to do the recipe. Eventually we'll be working on episodes how the steam fairy godmother could raise food for the children, use different assistive technologies, and it's really a wonderful thing. And I'm just grateful to be working with Pierce and Joseph to be accomplishing these. So once again, Pierce, thank you for having me on air. I wish you luck to the rest of the podcast and everybody else involved. Thank you for all participating in this wonderful cause.
Organizations throughout the world have created a variety of programs to bring attention to the plight of food insecurity for over 820 million people. The United Nations recently announced that food production needs to grow by 50% for everyone to have enough food to survive on a day-to-day basis. But what about accessibility to food? Even if food is available, how does one obtain it without sufficient money to buy it? I'd like to leave you, listener, with two simple questions. What are we potentially solving when we make food more accessible? And as local and global communities, how can we take the simple step, like a meal, to help these preventable issues from arising? As an animator and filmmaker, I am currently working on an animated short about this very subject.
Now Moses stood on the Red Sea shore. Spoke the water into black boy. Pharaoh's army got drowned.
If you would like to reach Joseph for more information on how theater can be used to bring attention to this serious world affliction, please contact Joseph Galata at joeygalata@gmail.com.